Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So guys, I spoke about this last night, the DACA, Democrats essentially laying down on the DACA debate on protecting dreamers. I want to be more concise with this because the other one ended up being like 2 hours long after back and forth and everything else. I want to be concise and I want to get my point across and why I believe this. Meaning, they're taking a knee and they're laying down on this. And I don't think they should take a knee and lay down on this. What I mean is, the Republican Party has a particular constituency. And the constituency that they have, for the most part, is people giving them cash and putting money down their G-strings. They have the religious base and those type of things. But the point I'm trying to make here is, even in cases where the Republican Party looks absolutely absurd and ridiculous, even when they're repudiating their own positions, for the most part, they will hold a position and they would stick to that position, backing up their constituencies. Ultimately, they understand that they don't necessarily have this kind of, they have to deal with minor constituencies. So they don't have this mixed melting pot of sorts. They have a very specific group of people who support their parties. And usually those people don't necessarily care about the economic interests outside of the 1% and the people who've been conned into this kind of cultural idea of republicanism. My point here, however, is you get a clear sense of what they represent based on what they're willing to do for either the sake of politics or for the sake of the people who are putting money in their pockets. What about Democrats? What about Democrats? You've heard me decry this idea of identity politics, where I tend to focus on this idea of class. I think class is more important than identity politics, and I think they use identity to obfuscate from issues of class. That said, let's be honest. The base of the Democratic Party, and I'm not talking about the lefties that left their party, I'm talking about the base of that party, deals with minorities. You're talking about blacks, LGBTQ, and you're talking about Hispanics. 1 in 4 Hispanics, if I'm not mistaken, and I need to find the stat, but the Dreamers, I think it's like over 1 million of them. 1 in 4 Hispanics are going to be affected by those Dreamers if they're pushed out the country. Those kids are Americans, through and through. Whatever you want to call Americanism, those kids grew up in this country through no fault of their own. And sending them anywhere else and kicking them out the country is abysmal and insane. Donald Trump didn't create this problem. If Obama and if Democrats really cared about the Hispanic population, the population that they rape for votes and go out to get those votes and beat that bush, and they beat that bush and they leave this stuff open in this way because they want to have that stick hanging over their heads. You understand that Obama, when he pushed this through and he allowed this kind of blind eye of the law in this way, he had the capacity to change that. Meaning he had the capacity to, just based on presidential power, to give them a pass. To say, I am giving them a pardon, they are now American citizens, they're in this country. And deal with it from that particular angle, not leaving it up for the Republican Party that is completely antagonistic towards all of those aims about immigration and all this other stuff. Either you fix it, but you can't point if you don't fix it. That's what I'm getting at. It's not so much that I think it's awesome that Democrats use identity politics. It's the fact that they do use identity politics. And the idea that they're going to use identity politics in all of these other contexts. But at this very specific point where you have a group of people who believe or who rely on them for a certain amount of protection, in particular, again, I make this point that this is an issue that they themselves created. You have a situation where you have a group of people who are vulnerable and need them to stand up for them, need somebody to stand up for them. And whereas Democrats will, under normal circumstances, use these groups as political fodder or as political gamesmanship, on this, even though they pledged to not allow the Dreamers to be kicked out the country, even though they pledged to get some action done on this particular thing and being willing to go to the mat in order to back these people up, they're taking a knee. Not the heroic kind. Not the heroic kind. This is the opposite of that. This is them worried about their seats, scared about their seats, and this other stuff. I am saying that if you're going to use these communities in the way that you use these communities, it is not insane for the communities to say, what do you represent? And if you're going to use us and invoke our name as if you're this party of multiculturalism, and they're attacking these elements of the community, the elements of your base. They're attacking elements of your base. And I know people make this point of saying, well, hey, Jamal, all these people are not illegal aliens and you're denigrating the Hispanics or the people who are illegally. I do no such thing. Ultimately, the people who are going to be kicked out of this country has connections of people that actually live in this country. And guess who those people tend to vote for? Democrats. Guess who Democrats go beating down their door to try to get votes and try to gin up this thing of Donald Trump is going to kick you out the country, Republicans are going to kick you out the country. And instead of doing something about it, they kick the can down the road because they believe that they will be incentivized to vote for Hillary Clinton if this loophole is still open and still hanging out. And even when Hillary Clinton lost, those months where Obama was a lame duck president, he still had the capacity to resolve this very specific issue for the Dreamers. They didn't do it. They didn't do it. One of the groups asked the question, we think we're being taken for granted. You are being taken for granted. The Democrats understand that you, African Americans, LGBTQ, labor, the 99%, they understand that ultimately you're stuck in somewhat of a game theory knot of sorts. You have one party that's completely rabid and batshit crazy, and you have this other party that's apathetic to you and have no spine whatsoever. And even though that party would depend on you for votes, even though that party would go shaking the bush to try to get you to come out and vote for them, even though they would do the best to scare the shit out of you to get that vote out of you, in no way will they be ever willing to go to the mat for your particular aims if they believe in any way it is going to adversely affect their chances of getting elected. My point here is that there are two competing politics. There's the more, how can I say it? There's the version of this that takes out the fact that you're dealing with human beings and that you're dealing with human beings being deported and that you're dealing with human beings who are stuck in this kind of political limbo used as political football. Let's take that part out for the moment. Pretend for the moment you're not talking about real human beings and real people. From a political standpoint, Democrats look at this as saying we're 18 points up with regards to Congress. Meaning if things continue to go the way they're going now, we are most likely going to take the House and we will most likely take the Senate. There are reports that Mitch McConnell and Republicans have been talking about this openly, meaning they understand that they are in a quagmire and that for the most part, they very well likely will probably lose. That's how much they're hated. That's how much they're hated. Now, they don't want to do anything to rock the boat on this. So from their standpoint, from the political gamesmanship, they're looking at, we have hard races in West Virginia, and we have hard races in some of these other states. And ultimately, if we take this action may be seen, we may be punished for taking this action in our states, particularly these states that lean further to the right. This is a brutal analysis because, again, it completely removes this idea that you're talking about human beings. That you're talking about human beings being part of this particular picture, and that politics is not purely just for the sake of politics, that it's done for reasons. Part of those reasons really does boil down to, what do you represent as a party? I know what Republicans represent. They represent cash. Tom Perez screams about his values in every occasion, and nobody knows what those values are. Do you understand that in each scenario, each of these decisions that come up, that you guys have to deal with, and you guys have to make decisions on what you're going to do, those are the things that explain your values more than anything else. I don't care what you say. These particular moments are the things that define your values, and right now this value is coming across as just being utter weakness. Utter weakness. The polls show that ultimately it's evenly split in regards to what the public is going to determine is responsible for a governmental shutdown. If you are not willing to stand up for this group African Americans are immensely loyal, but right after African Americans, the next group you have are Hispanics. If you're not willing to stand up for the family members that are going to be deported, for the people, the kids that are going to be deported, that grew up in this country, that lived in this country, and that ultimately you consistently give lip service saying that you're backing them up and you're standing behind them and all this other stuff. But when brass tacks, it's up for you to make a choice. It's up for you to make a decision. You get Democratic Party 101. Platitudes, incrementalism, half measures, and not really standing for anything. You should take a stand on this. That's my point. You want these people to vote for you. You push them to vote for you. You try to scare them and all this other stuff. You use them as a political gimmick and a political football. And now they're in a precarious situations because of your half measures. And at this point, I'm talking about the party. When Standing Rock, just a slight detour because I kind of want to make a point. When Standing Rock was going on, and they were beating their heads on Native Americans, beating the shit out of these people who just wanted to defend and protect their land, protect their water. Obama is pardoning a turkey, while at the same time, the actual indigenous people in this country, real indigenous people in this country, not a turkey, not a goddamn turkey, but real human beings, are getting their head bashed in by oil cops, oil police. The police force, paid by our tax dollars, representing the 1%, beating the heads of peaceful protesters. Bernie Sanders said something about it. Pretty much it. The other Democratic Party, the party that's supposed to be the quote-unquote lefties, turned a blind eye to what was taking place in that process. And, you know, Elizabeth Warren comes out after Obama puts out an easement, giving this kind of tepid support. Check the win, Elizabeth. That's essential. Elizabeth, check the win, Warren. Yeah, it's safe. It's safe. It's safe. Half measures. Obamacare. Do you believe Obamacare was an ideological choice, or do you believe it was a technical choice? Meaning, do you believe the question was asked, what is the best way to make sure that each and every person in this country is covered in healthcare? And what is the way to do it for the best price? Or do you believe it was just this random, I said I was going to do healthcare, so I'm going to do healthcare. Yeah, there's Romney Care. There's this Republican market-driven solution, given this utopian idea that you can have these leeches of the healthcare companies to be a part of the process, that you can allow drug manufacturers to make as much money as they want, and then at the exact same time try to keep rates down for actual human beings. The human beings in this being an afterthought. I'm making this point that these half measures, part of the reason you lose so much, half measures. No one believes you when you say this stuff. Ultimately, you don't stand for anything. And just like Obamacare, just like Standing Rock, and just like right now, with these dreamers, an issue that was created under your watch, that you were supposed to be the philosophical party that's supposed to represent this particular interest. And when rubber met the road, you guys folded again. You guys folded again. So I'm going to leave it at that. My point to this is, yes, you are taking these groups for granted. And yes, you're taking these groups for granted because these groups are allowing you to take them for granted. That's true. I think it's a hard case to make that that's not true. You understand that labor is going to be attacked by Republicans, so you don't really have to do anything in this case. You assume that labor is going to vote for you because the other party is batshit crazy. Same thing with Hispanics. You can kick this can down the road because you assume that having this to be a loose end, you can point to Republicans, you can use it to try to scapegoat them, and ultimately, you understand that it gives somewhat of an incentive for a part of the demographic to vote in a particular way if they're up for grabs, meaning if they're consistently vulnerable. If you're going to use identity to the way that you use identity, you should represent something. That's my point. I don't like this idea of using purely identity, but this is not a purely identity conversation. I mean, yes, you have a certain group that's vulnerable, and yes, I do believe that the party who uses and leverages that group all the time to get votes and to get their people in office, that you should back up the group that you use in this way. That's my point. That's the only point I'm trying to get at. And this is not a conversation about the wider issues of immigration and everything else. This is very specific to the Dreamers. very specific to the dreamers. You're talking about kids who grew up in this country. You understand that being an American or anything else is purely not real. You have fictitious borders, legal fictions. Ultimately, what does it mean to actually be an American? That doesn't mean anything. I'm sorry, it doesn't. What people attribute to being an American has to do with these ideas of values and culture and everything else that we kind of aggregate ourselves around, these common trinkets that we can associate ourselves with, saying, I know what this is, I grew up in this particular place, I behave in a particular way, and all of these things. There's a certain amount of similarities, and we consider ourselves in this way Americans. You understand that this country is all those kids know. For all intents and purposes, they're Americans. They're stuck in a legal quagmire, but they're Americans. And if the Democratic Party really is the party that's supposed to be supporting Hispanics and supporting this section of the population and supporting minorities and supporting, this other demographic, then you should support them. Even if it means going to the mat and showing what you actually represent. So I'll leave it at that. I don't want this to go too long, and I don't want to belabor the point. I understand the political realities of this. So, like I said, I don't. It's somewhat callous to take just purely the political realities when you have people at stake. This is, again, a humanistic perspective. I look at these things from the standpoint of human beings. But sometimes politics needs to exceed this thing of just politics and actually get to the real meat of what do you represent? What do you represent? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer to that question. I can go down the history of the past 20, 30 years, but I'm being very specific here within the issues of identity, because this is something that Democrats continuously hammer over and over and over and over again. And there's something problematic, and I would even say somewhat shameful, to use identity to the degree that Democrats use identity, and then something comes up where they need to represent the interests of that particular faction, of those factions that actually vote for them and support them in election after election after election. Rubber meets the road. Brass tacks. Weakness. Utter and complete weakness. At this point, I suppose we're used to it. I'll leave it at that. All right, guys. Patreon, assists, like, all that good stuff. Thanks, guys.